Great. How is everyone today? I hope we are all doing well, and thanks for joining me on the Saturday. I mean, it's Friday afternoon here, and for some of you guys, on the East Coast, it might be the nighttime. So thank you so much for taking time to join us, today for the webinar. And I think everyone can see my screen now, right? On the cover page, I have 3 ways to improve your SAT immediately. So hopefully, you're all able to see that. So uh, in today's open class, I will share with you, 3 top tips, to improve your scores quickly. I mean, a lot of students, come to me saying, "Oh, I got a 222 or got a 444. How to actually try to improve? And I'm only aiming for 66. And how can I actually get it quickly?" Here, I'm going to try to, summarize those tips in 3 solid, concrete and very how to say practical tips for you to take away, and hopefully by the end of the day you will be more confident and say, you know what, I can actually aim for 888 even. All right, so first of all, I guess I want to ask you guys, how you feel towards writing an essay or writing SAT essay in general. Are you more like that, frightened, and feeling like, oh, why am I doing this again? um, or are you more like, oh yes, essay writing, that's like my forte. But sometimes, coming out of the essay exam, feeling horrible or not scoring as much as you'd like to, or you're generally just, sort of defeated and, oh, again, and falling asleep, in front of textbooks and stuff like that. I think some of you might just be, a little bit of everything. So hopefully, by the end of today, you will be more, confident as to, what you can do to improve your essay. So really, I think, any essay writing, or especially for the SAT essay, it should actually be, more systematic, and you take, steps one by one, and eventually get to where you want to. And knowing that, it's actually possible to get the full scores and everything. Um, yeah, and I think Nate's sort of um, responded, number one, definitely. Some of number three. So yeah, I would share. I mean, for a lot of you, that's the feeling or the kind of response I would expect. So. And that's why you need the open classes like today. So basically, SAT essay should be more systematic. You should be building step by step towards a good score. So I guess before everything, though, I want to tell you one thing that allowed. I mean, the essay on the SAT, even though the College Board makes it optional, it is actually not. I mean, it is optional by officially, but as you know, a lot of the top schools, I mean, if you're aiming for those schools, actually, a wide range of schools, actually, Harvard, Yale, for example, Stanford, those very big names, UC Berkeley, Duke, Brown, just to name a few, they actually require the essays. So UC, actually all the UCs do require the essays too. So I would say, definitely is optional according to the College Board, but then according to the schools you apply to, it may not be, and most likely it's not. I know that a lot of you guys are aiming for a very top school, so definitely treat the essays, seriously. Give it the best, effort you can, and try to do as much as you can to prepare well for it. All right. So the SAT essay, it used to be more personal. It was prior to 2016. It was giving you one sentence, prompts and asking you to, oh, do you agree or disagree with this statement? And you basically have to provide all the, the evidence. I mean, all the examples to support your claims. So that used to be the case. And now, after 2016, after they reinvented or revamped the essay section, is now more academic writing sounding. So you'll be given, a passage, and then you have to sort of respond to that. So before anything, let's actually just briefly look at how essays are now structured. And some of you might be familiar with this already. Just bear with me. So some numbers, you'll be given this passage. They call it the source text. It's usually anywhere between 650 words to 700 words. It could be a long piece of writing. You have in total 50 minutes to study that source text, as well as write an essay in response to that. And then your essay should usually be 250 to 450 words long. Although on the actual test paper, you probably won't be counting one by one. Oh, here I'm reaching like 250. You don't have the luxury of time. So usually, if you write 2 complete pages and start filling out the third page, you're fine. And obviously, depending on your font size and everything, you might have to adjust accordingly. But yeah, that's usually where you should be. So how do you actually write that much, right? So what do you write about, about that source text? To some of you, who have taken the test, you probably will still remember, from reading from your source text. So the first box you have, basically on top of the essay, you have a box saying, as you read the passage below, consider how the author uses evidence, such as facts, examples, to support the claims, reasoning, which is, to develop ideas to connect claims and evidence, and stylistic persuasive elements such as word choice, appeal to emotion, add power to ideas expressed. So those are the 3 areas that you are supposed to be focusing on, how the author is supporting his or her claims. If there's any reasoning, if there's any, sort of logical, progression in the ideas, or, there's any impressive, features in language, so is this person trying to persuade you through very expressive language or strong words and stuff like that. So those are the kinds of things, to pay attention to. And then you'll be starting, to read the long passage, the source text. After that, you have another final prompt, basically giving you instructions as to what to write. So you need to write an essay in which you explain how the author builds an argument to persuade his or her audience that. So here, after that, there is actually, you actually will see the author's claim right here. So you actually be given, the main idea of that long passage. And I guess one quick tip, here is not one of the 3, but it's a bonus tip. You can actually read this box first, and then get a gist of what you're supposed to be reading, and then jump in to read that long passage. I think that sometimes help orient you a little bit and make you feel a little bit more at ease, especially when you first start, you might get a little stressed out or nervous. So yeah, I would say this is actually where they tell you the main idea of the passage. Therefore, it's actually not testing you on how well you've understood the text. It's more about how you can actually analyze or evaluate the text. So here, reading on in your essay, analyze how the author uses one or more of the features listed above, or features of your own choice, to strengthen the logic and persuasiveness of the argument. Be sure that your analysis focuses on the most important or most relevant features of the passage. And then, so here they make it explicit, you should not be explaining whether you agree or not with the claims, but you should, explain how the author builds an argument to persuade the audience and whether that's effective. So it's more about, oh, does this person, sort of convince the audience or me, in general, or not. So usually that's what you're supposed to be writing about. All right, and then let's see, let me clear all the markings. And the next thing to look at, obviously, is what they're looking for. What counts as, a good essay. So again, it's not what the author is trying to say. It's more about how the writer says something. And here is actually the rubric. And obviously, there's more to it. And I just cropped out, the most important. Or if you want to score an 8, the full marks, what you need to do. So and just to clarify a little bit, just in case you're not entirely familiar with how it's graded, you have 2 graders, two readers, to look at your essays. Each of them will, as long as you write something, they will, give you somewhere between a 1 to a 4 for each of these 3 sections. So that's why, the most you can get, if you get 4 out of all the 3 sections, out of 4 for all 3 sections, and if both exam readers agree, in that case, then the maximum you can get will be 8. And obviously, sometimes if one person gives you 1 and some person not too friendly person might give you a 0, then you probably end up getting 0 and 1, adding up it will be a 1. So in general, your score can range anywhere between 1 to 8 for the 3 sections. And obviously, we're aiming for at least a 6, if not a 7 or 8. That's what I generally recommend my students. Really, the 4, a 4 is generally, pretty, it's below average, is not good. A 6, I think, is enough. Is not fabulous, but it's, not too bad. So that will at least not hurt your chances, for getting to college. Remember, those very big name schools are eager to, to receive your results with the essays. They actually, what happens is that, after you read the essay, they actually make a scan of the image of what you write. So then the schools actually, when they receive the score reports, they actually will see the essays. Some schools might use that as a gauge as to see, how well you respond under pressure and how well you actually write, and just to use that as an additional piece of, supporting document to see how, it's more like maybe a small writing sample. So, but they also at the same time though, yeah, it could be very scary. I see that some students are already, oh my gosh, it could be scary. That's why you want to give it the best effort. You don't want to just, do whatever. Like I said, a 6 is not too bad. So then you at least, will won't be, your chances won't be hurt, by that. But then I think lower than that is kind of, tricky. And obviously you want to aim for 7 or 8, and that's, on the better range. So yeah, so you definitely want to pay attention. And I guess, so those of you, notoriously, famous for bad handwriting, I think you should, at least try to practice a little bit, at least, try to write more legibly and make sure people understand you. Because, in general, I think bad handwriting, for exam readers is just very unpleasant to look at, and may not be, sort of direct. They won't be able to penalize you based on bad handwriting, but then they also skip over the bad handwriting, and then you end up, they end up reading a fragmented piece of your thoughts, and, so that will just indirectly affect your scores as well. Yeah, so I think in general you'd want to, polish up, try to make your handwriting, more pleasant to read, and easier to follow. So let's actually zoom into the 3 sections just a little bit, and then we'll see, what they're looking for, in particular for the 3 sections. The reading section is actually, in plain English, it actually means understanding or comprehension. So they want to make sure, if you get an 8, that means that, they are really happy with your level of understanding of the source text, that you demonstrate that you've understood it really well. So the first, criteria is that you demonstrate the thorough understanding or comprehension of the source text. And also, second one is, you understand the central idea, which is given actually. So I think more likely than not, you can capture the main idea, and you can kind of have an understanding of it. A lot of times you also want to try to understand the most important details and how they interrelate, how they connect to each other. So that's one more thing that's also, important in their eyes. Your response should be free of errors and interpretation. If something is about, the importance of carrying out an action, and your understanding is that it's not important, then it's clearly, you're failing to understand what's going on in the passage. So you want to, if you're not understanding it really well, then at least don't reveal it, when you write it. And the last piece is, makes use of textual evidence, quotation, paraphrase, both demonstrating complete understanding of the source text. So it's more about how well you've understood the text, and there are certain ways that you can demonstrate that. So we'll go over that later. The second piece is actually the hardest one to score. I've always had students who came back with 626, meaning the 2 in the middle is analysis. So they basically spend a lot of time and they try to write a lot, but then they don't really score that well on it. Analysis tends to be the part that, that's easily missed or misinterpreted. So that's why a lot of my focus, during my classes is what you say, to analyze what counts as analysis and how you should analyze. So here, just to look at what they're looking for, that you need to have an insightful analysis of the source text. You want to demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of the task. And actually, I would say those adjectives are very, subjective. I mean, what counts as insightful to me may not be as much, to you. So I would say, those are kind of, subjective adjectives there. The second piece is, you have to offer a thorough, well considered evaluation of the, evidence, reasoning, and or language elements. So I think I would say, maybe touching upon all those three would be safer if you can, at least maybe two, of them. So that's important. And you could also choose something of your own choice. You may just make up some concept and then try to like, substitute what you read, in the source text into your own framework. So that could also work sometimes. And then you want to provide, some relevant, sufficient, strategically chosen support for your claim. So as as a good writer, you should know that if you say something, you need to back it up with evidence. So that's also one of the things that I'll be, questioning and sort of interrogating and say, why do you say that? Why do you think so? So you have to also sort of explain your claims really well. And then the last piece is, focus consistently on the features that are most relevant to addressing the task. So you want to, be on target and make sure that what you say is relevant to, and sort of the most important, right, among all the within the content of the source text. So that's for analysis. And I would say that's, typically where my students score the lowest. And, sometimes they get, 8, 6, 8 or something like that. So then that only, that missing piece or the shorter board in the bucket is the analysis piece. Some of it might be 6, 4, 6. So that's definitely, typically the hardest part to score on. And then the last one is actually easier. It's called writing section. The writing section is basically your English, how well you demonstrate your command of English, or how well you write as a writer. A lot of very concrete advices or criteria is listed here. You can see that there is you need cohesive response. You need to demonstrate a highly effective use of language. You need to have a precise central claim, and that's kind of easy to write. There's a formula to it. And then there's a skillful requirement for the skillful introduction, conclusion, effective progression of ideas. And then you need to use a wide variety of sentence structures, response, demonstrate a consistent use of precise word choice. You need to maintain a formal style, objective tone. Here is almost like a laundry list of what they're looking for. So yeah, I would say that these are very, very useful and important things to pay attention to. Yeah, so I would say these are things that you can easily capture and try to improve on. So let's see. So then I guess after the test, you come out and then you see your score, and then you're like, oh, why am I getting a 4 from 4 or 2 to 2, or something that's not what I expected. I thought I did much better. So let me give you the 3 tips that I promised that I would to help you quickly, hopefully quickly improve those areas. So the first area concerns the reading section. As you remember from my last slides, reading section is about your understanding of the source text. So then a lot of my students actually, in the past, they directly copy long sentences and paragraphs, from the source text. They just thought that filling in that space with words is a safe way to score well. It's actually not. For example, if you look at this is actually from one of the College Board's essays. I mean, it's definitely not for to a full scoring essay, but here you can see the problem. In the 6th paragraph, the author says the claims that plastic bags are worse for environment than paper bags or cotton reusable bags are dubious at best. So it's like citing the whole sentence. He also leads the reader to infer that supporters of the bill believe plastic bags are evil incarnate and use government force to compel people to live the way they think best. In the 1st paragraph, the author talks of how California's dodged yet another nanny state regulation. So a lot of citations, and this is actually a main part of the paragraph that scares me, because it's the person is citing a little too much, is writing complete sentences, copying exactly what the author is trying to say, and that's not effective in terms of citation, because when you cite, you want to maybe just pick out the most important parts of the citation and just say, oh, this demonstrates something. So you can, for example, if this person is trying to show, oh, there's some words here and there with a lot of strong connotation or emotions, I think here really the author really just wants to bring out dubious that's like the most important word. And also like evil incarnate, and here, compel people, blah, blah, blah. So sometimes it makes sense, to have a longer phrase. But sometimes, if all you want to say is that, oh, it's this word dubious, then I think it makes sense to just cite that one word and paraphrase in the rest of the citation. So you want to just cite more skillfully. You want to use the combination of summary, paraphrasing, and direct quotations. So I think with that in mind, you will be able to demonstrate better how well you've understood the source text. You want to just bring in the most important details as you need, not just citing the entire sentences. Because when you cite entire sentences, it's not going to help your understanding, because you're not really demonstrating that you've understood it. You're just merely copying it, and it doesn't count as analysis either, and it's not your language either. So it doesn't really contribute to any of the three categories. So I would say don't copy. If anything, cite skillfully and try to paraphrase and only bring out the important words that you want to highlight. Right. And then I think Nate at this point has a question: do you have to cite the paragraph number as well? Not really. We're not really talking about a scholarlistic piece of writing. You're not really going to publish your essay that you write in 50 minutes. So it's really not so much about you being scholarly in citation. If you recall from the rubrics, the writing section doesn't even have a point for a bullet point, for citing things, well, according to MLA or Chicago or whatever citation style you prefer. So it's really not so much about citing, properly. It's, you just have to make sure that you put things in quotation marks if they are directly copied from the source text. Other than that, you don't really have to say exactly where. Obviously, sometimes it helps, if you say, oh, in this paragraph, or when the author talks about this, he mentions that, and then he cites this. So it might make sense, to sort of situate your readers a little bit and make sure they know where exactly you're copying from if it's not entirely obvious. In this case, though, if you're looking at dubious, really this author only used it once in the entire passage, so it should be pretty obvious, where it's taken from. So I think it's also, your judgment call whether or not you want to mention, oh, from this paragraph, I see this, or you just simply cite that word, and if it's just one-time occurrence. All right, so that's the first tip. I mean, hopefully that with that, you will generally, hopefully, from a 4 or a 6, you can at least bring it up to a 7 or 8. Citing something skillfully is important, and that's also something that's a low-hanging fruit. You can easily try to fix that, with your own paraphrasing, and you can see pretty obvious results from doing that. All right, so that's my first tip. And then the second one concerns the hardest part to write, which I hope you remember, is analysis. So analysis part, really what counts as analysis, right? So if you look at this particular sort of paragraph that I cited, it's actually from one of the college boards, again, the official websites, one of the essays there. In this case, let's see, according to this author's name is Bogart, Natural Darkness. Some of you might have read the source text. You're probably familiar with it. So this person is trying to talk about, how the author makes a very strong argument about, natural darkness is essential, is important. So natural darkness can be positive to, help to humans. One of the ways it can accomplish this is by giving enjoyment to onlookers. To supplement this, Bogart gives a personal example of how he enjoys seeing meteors dart across the night sky in Minnesota as a child. Also, he states that natural darkness can be a source of solitude. Supporting this claim, he states that this is invaluable. Additionally, he states that blah, blah, and then he gives an appealing allusion, blah, blah. As you can see, right, I've highlighted sort of his trend. He's basically saying he states that all the time. So I think even without reading the source text now, some of you who haven't read the source text yet, after reading this, you kind of have a very clear picture of what this source text is all about, right? Because he basically paraphrased or summarized the whole thing for you. But then if you're summarizing a little too much, that's not good either, because then you're not leaving or giving enough space for analysis. If it's not just so much about your comprehension, it's more about, okay, is this author effective? Is this author able to achieve his goal, which is to convince his readers, right? So in this case, then you want to analyze more. So that's actually also where, a lot of confusions and difficulty arise. Some of my students find it hard. What counts as analysis, right? Really, you have to talk about the author's intention. Why is the author trying to do this? Why is he telling a personal story? Why is he using rhetorical questions? Why is he making mention to Bengal? Why is he, sort of, making mentions to like historical, pieces and stuff like that. And then after talking about that, right, you can maybe guess why the author does that, or you can say, oh, the author, is trying to do this with this. So you can just maybe give some kind of a hypothetical reason, for the author's, particular approach. And then lastly, you want to always bring it back to the reader. You want to say, oh, how readers will react to that. So it's either logically or emotionally, touching upon their sort of, what resonates with them, right? So you want to later on bring it in the end, bring it back to the readers, and then say how readers would, react to what's happening. So whenever you try to do these two things and don't mix them, I think that one other thing is that, people tend to, a lot of my students tend to mix these two things and say the author's intention is to get the readers to think this way. But they're actually not the same thing. I mean, authors might think one way, or they're doing this purely for informing purposes. They may not really want you to feel a certain way, for example. So you sometimes have to separate them out, and that's how you can write more for analysis and show that you are able to, analyze or say more things about what the author is trying to do. So that's my second tip in general for the analysis part. And by the way, this is really hard, and because it takes practice. You need to sort of talk about the author's intention and reader's reaction. So that's the most important. Um, I guess that's one of the tips that I want you to take away for the analysis part. And then the third one concerns the writing part. As you can see, in this particular, this is again another essay about Let There Be Dark, which is, the importance of darkness. So the person basically writes, darkness is essential to humans. He states, blah, blah, blah. And again, this is a very long citation. One more thing, like I said, to avoid, he basically cites the most, almost like the whole paragraph or something. And then he cites, oh, this is from the second paragraph. Okay. I mean, you're citing, this person definitely cites a little too much, and the sentence structure actually isn't very sophisticated. We're just seeing the person states, and that's it. That's really the main structure of the sentence, even though it's really long. And then we see here, Bogart talks about the importance, humans need darkness. So it's all very small, simple sentences. I would say here that brings me to sort of the third tip, vary your sentence structure. That usually is a very, useful tip, for you to improve your score, bringing your writing score from a 4 or 6 to 7 or 8. So that's a very quick thing, to do. I mean, obviously on the test, you're under stress, you'll be, writing quickly. You probably won't pay much attention to that. That's why, it makes sense to practice that through your daily writing or the, throughout the class that you participate. So, and that's basically what I usually, basically challenge my students to look at or to pay attention to. You have to constantly remind yourself that's a habit building process. And that's why it makes sense, to have a longer term, essay class, a series of classes where every single time you're being reminded on that, and then by the time you finish the class, that will sort of stick to your subconsciousness or the stick to your brain more deeply, so deeply entrenched in your writing. So that's also another thing that through longer term essay classes, that's something that we should work towards. So you want to combine simple sentences into more complex sentences. All right, so that's my 3 top tips for you to be successful in the on the test. And then as to how you can sort of slowly build towards that. Basically my plan is throughout my group classes, I usually, sort of give a set of instructions or have, my students look at one particular feature. Remember, you're supposed to be talking about evidence, reasoning, and language. So I like to, break it down to the kinds of evidence, the kinds of reasoning, kinds of language elements you should pay attention to. And then we just like zoom into each of the, the features. So maybe one per session. That's, my plan for the group class. You want to really dig deep into what you should say, to analyze each of the kinds of feature that you might encounter, because really you might prepare hundreds of essays. I mean, obviously you probably won't, but like if you do, you probably would read all these essays, and then you write all the sort of essays for each of them. But then on the test you'll be given the 101st essay, and that might look a little different or totally different. So I think really the point is not to practice as many as possible. I think you need to smartly practice. You want to just like be exposed to different kinds of things as much as possible, but then also kind of know the general trends, in all of them. So for example, one of the evidence that you might encounter is personal story. So then one of my sessions will be entirely on personal story. We will examine, how authors bring in personal story from different text, pieces of source text. We will look at them all together. Some of it might have very well written, sample essays. Then we'll look at, study them together and see what makes them successful. And then for some of them, we may not have very good paragraphs. You might look at very lousily, very poorly written paragraphs, and then say what exactly is wrong with that. And then we will, practice, on some of the new source texts, and then we try to maybe write. Each of you, in the class, will be writing paragraphs on, how personal stories can strengthen the author's claim and stuff like that. And then in the end, if time permits, or if the groups are allowed, you can go into smaller group discussion if it's becomes a very large group, or if it's a small group to start with. Then we can actually read each other's essays and actually give each other points, or explain why you're giving this this score to a particular person's writing. And you want to actually because with that you actually will know what you should be looking for and what's important when people are grading. And here basically on the screen you see that this is actually from one of my classes. I basically show my students some students seem to have some confusion as to what counts as ethos, pathos, and logos. These are the typical things that you learn from your English class if you're in taking English classes in the United States. These are the kinds of concepts that you might encounter, but sometimes you might be confused as to what counts as ethos, what counts as pathos, what counts as logos. So sometimes I bring in some graphics that might be helpful, that hopefully will give you a better idea, and hopefully makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. So that's something that you could expect from some of the classes. Another thing is also a lot of the times is to actually zoom in and look at the writing, the actual pieces of writing. So for example, these are the from the past classes. I've sort of added individual essays for each of the students, or collectively we work on something. And then obviously if you write by hand, you can definitely just take a picture and send it to us. There are ways for us to actually give you sort of feedback, no matter how you've accomplished the written assignments. So yeah, so these are the so these are the I guess the key points that you would expect from the group class. And I think like previously you've probably also seen somewhere the sort of the benefits of having group class is that there could be a range of abilities in the same class, and that's actually a good learning point for a lot of the students. Some of the the weaker students might feel like, oh, there's a lot to learn from the sort of the higher level students, and some of the higher level students will also be able to benefit from the lower level students because there are different angles. Each person has a different perspective. So then the ways that you can sort of write or analyze particular source text or particular feature, each person has a different opinion. So having a group class usually will broaden your perspective. You will broaden your horizons and make you see sort of how all different people think. And then people also coming from different backgrounds might also have different perspectives. So I think a lot of it is to sort of give you an environment, and safe environment, to actually learn from each other and try to challenge each other, and sort of give yourself a lot of different allow yourself to be more open-minded and see more from your peers. Generally I think a lot of the group classes tends to be more dynamic as well, because it's not just you seeing me, you're also seeing all the other students at the same time. You could be chatting with, a lot of my students in the past like to use the chat box a lot, and they interact with each other. They have fun, they talk, and obviously they may not be in the same location, so they may not be become, real friends, but then at least you have these virtual friends supporting each other. You're learning, through a group collective effort. So there are a lot of benefits to group classes. And like I said, a longer term group class would also benefit students in a way that, hopefully that will instill some habitual, good practices in your mind, so that you always remember, okay, I need to vary my sentence structure. I need to cite more skillfully. So you want to always be reminded so that you can develop those habits over time. Yep. So those are my the main things I want to cover. So at this point, I think I'm going to open up, to sort of all the questions that you might have. Previously, during, when I was speaking, I probably wasn't able to sort of address a lot of the questions. So at this point, you can feel free to add your questions to the Q&A or to the chat box, and then I'll try to address the questions that you have. All right. Feel free to type any questions that you might have, and then I will first read the questions just in case, the question is directed only to the panelists, not to all attendees. I'll just sort of tell you what the question is, and then I'll try to respond to that. Any question at all, you can ask me anything regarding the test, or, the sort of more tips, or where you are, what the situation for you is, what's your biggest confusion. You can share with me, all those things. And then I guess if you have more questions, or if you want to know more about how the group class schedule is structured, you can also type those questions into the box. Mm. So one question is from Nate. He asks, some books have very rigid time constraints. Would you recommend that? That's a very good question. So I think eventually you would want to get used to the time constraint, just because this test is a very stressful one. You only have 50 minutes to finish everything. So I think eventually you would want to get into sort of following the timeline more rigidly or more strictly. But I would say at the beginning, though, as you are still building out your abilities and trying to remember to vary in the structure at this earlier stage, I would say don't worry too much about the time constraints, because by the time you finish looking at examining all the different kinds of features that you can talk about, you would have already built a list of things that you can anticipate, or you can expect to say, and usually that will save you some time on the actual test, and hopefully that will make you help you finish your essay within the allowed the limited time period you're given. So I'd say I don't generally recommend that. I mean, especially at the earlier stage. I mean, obviously, if you're taking tests really soon, in October, or yeah, like if that's the case, if you're not, sort of preparing, sort of starting out as a new person, preparing for this, for the essay, then I think you would probably want to stick more rigidly, or at least, try to respect the timeline, because that's part of it is also getting used to the time limit that you have, and make sure that you can finish on time. So a lot of it, there's a fine balance. You want to maybe just give yourself that 15 minutes and try to do as much as you can, and then maybe write a line and know where exactly you ended, and then maybe try to still finish your essay later on, but then know how much more you need to write, so that you can speed up accordingly and try to work towards being able to finish. And then also I think another thing is I mean, at least as far as I know, they're not supposed to penalize you for unfinished essays. So sometimes, it's if you're towards the end, right, of the essay, you're trying to decide, oh, should I finish writing this body paragraph, or should I like try to quickly wrap it up and then say something in conclusion? I would say, if that's your dilemma, I think you should definitely stick to finish writing that body paragraph, because I think likely towards the end of the paragraph, you're analyzing and you're actually trying to gain points, as you're analyzing. But then what do you gain through a conclusion? I think conclusion is usually similar, or if not a repeat, right, paraphrase of the introduction. So I feel like, it's not as important or essential. If you have to forego one, I would say forego the conclusion, and still try to, stay calm and try to finish up your last bit of analysis, because I think that will make a difference to analysis part, to the reading part. I feel like conclusion, if you have to lose something, conclusion may not be as important. I mean, you will be taking some points away for the writing portion, because the writing portion wants to have some conclusion. But I think but then at the same time, you're probably gaining, if you do finish your paragraph, you're gaining points for the reading, for the analysis. Yeah. So yeah, I would say that's a long, answer to your short question, but yeah, I would say at the beginning, don't worry too much about the timeline, but towards the end, as you're preparing for the test, try to stick to the timeline as far as you can. All right, and then let's see. Okay, so let's see. So Nate also has Nate was saying, just wondering, since I saw I guess, yeah, because I think Nate also took the test, in August, and he said that he saw the guy next to him reading for 10 minutes for the essay, and then he write for around 20 minutes and was done, and then while he was still analyzing. So that's definitely scary. I mean, a lot of times it's like a psychological thing, right? It's like, oh my gosh, that guy next to me, he already finished. Like, what do I do? So a lot of it, that adds to the stress. Stay calm. Don't worry too much about them. I mean, each person has a different timeline or how they wish to do it. I had a student who interestingly, he kind of gives up on the essays, to be honest. And then I think we sort of prepared a lot of things for him to remember, or to at least memorize or bring to the test with him, or mentally. But then he just didn't really want to do that. And then what ended up happening is that he was sitting there for like half an hour. I mean, he read the text for half an hour, and then mostly just like his mind wandering away and not really doing much. And then in the last 20 minutes, he like quickly wrote 2 paragraphs, not even sophisticatedly. And then he got, he scored like 4 for example, right? I mean, that's like surprisingly easy. I mean, to be honest, because I feel like he's not really putting as much effort that as he should have to that piece of writing. So then yeah, I mean, that's not to say that you should do that, but I mean, different people have different timelines, and then they might have different like purposes. They might just be aiming for who knows. And then I mean, this person definitely maybe writes for 20 minutes and probably is a fast writer, who knows. But I mean, different people have different abilities, so then you also have to just stick to your own pace and your own comfortable range and everything. So I think usually I would say maybe spend 10 minutes to 15 like reading, planning, and then spend a good 30 minutes or so like actually trying to write, because really the more time you have, the more you can work on it, the more you can write, the more you can polish it. So yeah, I would say definitely try to spend more time writing than 20 minutes. So don't learn from him, don't worry too much about him. I mean, he's not you, so really like I think there's no comparison to be worried about. So don't worry too much about that. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. And then let's see. All right. Okay, so then let's see, 2 more questions that I have. So here, one question from Chirui Long. Let's see, about the analysis part, if I write more, will I get higher scores? That's a good question. I mean, I think when I see this question, I think it's almost like, oh, do I guess your sort of basis point is like, oh, does it matter if I like how much I write? Is it necessarily like the more I write, the higher score I get? I think I'm understanding it this way. I mean, obviously you want to write as much as you can. So if you can write more, definitely write more. But also it's the quantity sometimes doesn't also always translate into quality. You could be writing a lot and a lot and a lot, but then if they are going in a circle, if you're repeating yourself, if you're basically not progressing, if you're not adding new things, I think the quantity doesn't always you don't always get rewarded on just simply writing more. So I think you also want to pay attention to the quality of your analysis. You want to make sure, like I said, touch upon the readers, the author's intention, the reader's reaction, and what more you can say about it. Or is there a logical flaw in there, or is there like, does it make sense logically? How is it gonna influence the readers? So a lot of the analysis actually means that you need to address those questions. So that's why in the group class, you will tend to be able to see how people analyze something, and then I'll whenever I see gaps, always challenge my students, like, why do you say that, or where do you see that? You're jumping quickly to conclusions. Here you need to say more. So like there are things like that, so then you can identify your logical loopholes and try to fill those in. I hope that answers your question. Yep. And then, okay, and let me actually go to Esther Zhang's question, and before I go back to Nate's question. So Esther has a question: how to find sources to practice? That's a very good question. Some of it you can try to find those online. I mean, a lot of the past year sources might be made available already, through the the web. You could also go to College Board's official website. I think there are two pretty good source texts. A lot of it actually is just like opinion based writing. You could try to start reading if you're still in an earlier stage, like I mentioned. You could go to the website and try to maybe go to New York Times, the opinions column. Or any newspaper article like that has a column where it's more opinion based, the author is trying to convince you on something. That's usually, those are very good places to start. And as a lot of the source texts are adapted from newspaper articles, so that's actually a pretty good place. I mean, imagine one day you read something and then you realize, oh, actually, like on the test you encounter something that you read regularly, like one day on the news. So that'll be cool, right? Because you've already had some exposure or some thoughts on it. So yeah, definitely pay attention to the opinion based columns of major like news avenues. So I think those are the good places to start. Don't limit yourself to just one type of maybe science passages if you're a science person, or maybe art ones. Expose yourself to as many different kinds of genres and different kinds of subjects as possible, because you never know what you encounter on the test. All right, and then hopefully that answers Esther's question. Let me go back to Nate's question. Nate says, I want to add one more question. Would you recommend using something like a template for the essay? Khan Academy actually has essay practice where, yeah, they give you articles. So yeah, I think his suggestion is good. That you could also try to look at some of Khan Academy's online resources. I think to Nate's question though, do I recommend using something like a template? I would say yes and no. I mean, for depending on what kind of student or what kind of scores you're aiming for. In order to get full scores like 888s, you definitely wouldn't want to follow a template, because the most it can get you would probably be a 6 or 7. You won't ever be able to get I mean, yeah, because templates are limited. They are sort of predicting what you see, but then what you actually see on the test may be totally different. So I guess depending on what kind of template you're talking about, I generally recommend just having more sort of thoughts on what you can say about this particular kind of feature, this kind of evidence. I can say this. These are the main points that I might be able to touch upon, and I maybe prepare accordingly. Maybe some sentences here and there. So I think I tend to like the idea of having some template sentences instead of an entire like a template. Like essay level template. You just have to fill in the little holes here and there. So that I feel like that won't be as helpful, especially when the essay may be very totally different from what you prepared before. Right, and then yeah, I think, yeah, okay. So I think Nate was clarifying, saying, oh, it's, developing original style of writing for essays. Definitely, I think it helps, to have your own style. So a lot of the, my help is like to get you to realize what you're lacking. But then you also then slowly have to build your own way of writing something, like how you want to, analyze things and how you want to piece things together, structure things, what makes sense, to talk about first or second and stuff like that. So you want to actually eventually develop your own style, and hopefully that's through a longer process in which you have the space and the freedom, to explore different styles before you actually develop your own and find the best way. And I think a lot of I like to use the analogy of martial arts. I feel like for each of the um, the evidence or the language and all the features, I think it's mostly just like a stance or a posture or some kind of action that you learn. And then in the end, really on the actual test, whatever you encounter, it's your own like time to put every posture or stance or little acts together and make your own like martial art or kung fu performance. So I think really it's with me through all the classes, it's more about preparing all the little bits of things and then knowing what's possible, knowing what is good, and then slowly develop your own style so that it doesn't limit you. So I think really the last thing that I want to do is to create this thing that limits your thinking or your process. I think if anything, it should broaden your perspective and give you more ideas. All right. Hopefully that answers your question. I mean, thanks a lot for all the questions. So, I guess, do you guys all have other questions, or you feel like that addresses most of your questions or concerns? Um, I mean, obviously, you always have the chance to connect with us, either through WeChat or through the I guess telephone or email or multiple avenues, and you can always bring in more questions. And I guess that way we can maybe give you more personalized advice. But I guess our hope is to see you in the group class so that we'll learn from each other, and I can help all of you improve and also learn from each other at the same time. So yep. So I think that's all I have, unless you have any other questions. Um, no. All right. Yep. With that, okay, sounds great. So yeah, I think so. I don't see any more questions coming, so I'll assume that for now you're good. If not, if you think anything else, definitely reach out to us, either through WeChat or something else. So, all right. So I think that's all I have for today. And like I said, reach out to us through WeChat. Here's our WeChat, account or official account, or the platform where you can receive more news. Feel free to scan that barcode if I don't know if it's large enough, but feel free to join us and ask us more questions that way. And then yeah, I think that's all I have for today. All right. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope that this has been helpful. At least, yep. And then, all right. And then for some of you, who has taken the test in August, definitely reach out to us and share with us your results, and let us know where you think your gaps are, and then let us know what we can help. What we can do to help you. And yep, thank you so much for attending today. I wish you a good rest of the weekend. Yep. So, all right. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the night.